Hi, on this episode of Cracking Addiction, join us as Dr. Samantha Harte shares her gripping story of overcoming perfectionism and addiction, and her innovative approach to applying the 12 steps in everyday life for true wellness and recovery. So today we have Dr. Samantha Harte, who started life out as a physical therapist, but you are so much more than just a physical therapist, Samantha. So first of all, tell us exactly your professional titles, and then tell us why you're so much more than just that title.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Yeah, once upon a time, I was Dr. Samantha Harte, physical therapist, period, end of sentence. And now my website and my business cards say that too. I worked very hard for that doctorate, as you know, but underneath it, best-selling author, keynote speaker, podcast host, life coach, and sober mom of two.
Now, that's a lot of tickets. That's a lot on your business card.
It's actually quite small.
Now, we have a mutual interest in addiction. So how did you become interested in addictions given your professional background?
Because I suffered from it. I grew up in a family of addicts, and way before I struggled with addiction, I struggled very much on the other side of the dynamic of addiction, which is codependency, people pleasing, self abandonment. So everything was highly controlled. I always say my drug of choice is control when I boil it down and I peel back. And through a series of life events, coupled with everything I learned in my house growing up, which is on a good day or a bad day, you can drink or take a pill and feel better, or at least feel different. And so it wasn't that surprising that drinking and drugs was something that was not just normalized, but something I really believed I could control. And within a few years, I overdosed on cocaine on the very evening I got accepted into a doctoral program for physical therapy. So that really encapsulates the way I lived. I think a lot of people have this mantra, which is work hard, play hard. And it's very dangerous. And I'm now very much a recovering perfectionist. But at the time, I was completely unrecovered. So I was always driven by the voice in my head that said, harder, faster, thinner, smarter. Never enough, never enough, never enough. It was unrelenting between my ears. And so I would push myself to the brink to be the best, to be perfect. And it was so exhausting that I needed to party as hard as I was beating myself up. And if cocaine is in the mix, you can end up dying. I don't know why I didn't. I came to. All of that was something I was reckoning with as I was getting this very prestigious degree. And in fact, I was halfway through grad school before I actually got sober. So addiction has been a part of my life forever. Luckily, now I'm 15 years sober. Recovery has been a prominent force in my life, and it has become more and more important to me. The spiritual side of wellness always feels like it's at the epicenter of all of our suffering. And I don't just mean addicts, I mean humans.
There's a difference there, isn't there? There's a difference
And
between people's perceptions of addiction versus people's perception of wellness. And I think that wellness should be applied to people who have got troubles with substances because wellness is for everyone. It's not just for the elite.
yeah, and also it doesn't have to be for the guttural face down in a pit of despair rock bottom, though it often is.
So, how did you then incorporate your passion for recovery with your professional excellence?
Working on myself spiritually in recovery, which by the way was an intensely bumpy road because I was one of those people who came into a 12-step meeting and was like, absolutely not. I don't drink like you. I don't look like you. Look at all these accolades. I've got the degree and the body and the boyfriend and the job. No, thank you. And this whole God thing, I grew up in a house where if you believe in God, you're a fool. And the only person you can count on is yourself. So thanks, bye-bye.
So, what kept you there? In my practice, I recommend a lot of 12 step work, and there's a group of patients that just look me in the eye and think that I am utterly mad.
The first time I went was after my overdose. I was spooked into the rooms. I was very clear I was losing control over that. But when I read the steps and I heard what people were saying and all the things I'd have to give up and all the control I'd have to relinquish, especially to a power greater than myself, I thought, absolutely not. It was requiring me to dismantle every single belief system that I now know in hindsight kept me safe as a girl.
So, what was the belief system that kept you safe?
Oh, well, so long as you can please, perfect, and perform, and everything on the outside of you looks good, you're fine.
So, why was that an obstruction to you accepting that your life was unmanageable and that you were powerless over your substance?
Having a powerlessness over substance to me had nothing to do with powerlessness over life as I knew it. They were completely separate things. And the steps were asking me to say, no, no, no. You have to relinquish power over people, places, things, situations. You have to get down with a God that you can't see or touch or know, even though your mom told you there's no such thing and your mom's word was God, in order for you to never drink again and never do drugs again. And that was absolutely unimaginable to me.
Now, that's slightly different from how I understand the powerlessness concept in the first step, which for me is purely a powerlessness over the substance. So, you're telling me that you were going through a phase when you were told that you were effectively powerless over life?
Oh, yeah. So, what started as drugs and alcohol, which by the way, I didn't fully believe either. I just told myself a story that I did too much that night. And by the way, I had family members co sign that story. The very next day of my overdose, I had leftover cocaine. I brought it with me. This is the insanity of the addict to a Christmas party at my sister's in law's house. I bring her up to the bathroom. I confess what happened. I'm terrified. I'm looking to my big sister to tell me something to make me feel less afraid. And she said, you just did too much. Here, give me the cocaine. And she put some on her fingernail and I snorted it. I wasn't even convinced after my overdose that I was losing control over drugs and alcohol, let alone anything else in my life. Control had a noose around my neck, and it would take 5 more years in recovery. The relapse and suicide of my sponsor, who saved my life, by the way, and who had 22 years sober from heroin addiction, and a marital crisis where I tried everything to control and change my husband's mind about me before I hit spiritual rock bottom, before I was fully ready to concede that I needed a whole new way of living.
So, I can't remember if we have actually just gone through the reasons that kept you in the rooms first. What was the reason that kept you in the rooms? What was the hook?
When I went to that first meeting after my overdose, I crossed my arms in the back and said, absolutely not. I didn't go back for a year and a half. In that year and a half, I tried to use cocaine like a normal person. It didn't work. So then I said, wow, I really can't use cocaine at all. I thought, well, that drug I can't do because that drug might kill me, but I could do other things. So just don't do that. And I found myself doing it again. So I broke this promise to myself. I then had a father who, for many, many, many years, was the family enabler. And he was driving in prescription drugs that weren't prescribed to him or me whenever I needed them. So I relied heavily on that. So I would smoke a lot of weed, I would still drink alcohol, and then I would pop Xanax or Ambien and not remember much of what was said. And I had this boyfriend at the time who was with me before my addiction became a serious problem, through my active and worst addiction into my overdose that I didn't tell him about for a very long time. And now into this version of my addiction where I was just using downers instead of uppers. And one day, after I moved the prescription pill bottle to a new hiding spot, he found it and he held it up and he looked at me with such disgust in his eyes. And he said, "You're still doing this shit?" That is what got me to go back to a 12-step meeting. I was so afraid he would leave me. It wasn't for me. It wasn't about me. He was external to me. He was external proof that I mattered. And I thought he was on his way out, and that terrified me. So I went back.
So what did the downers do for you?
All of the drugs, uppers or downers, I came to discover in those first 6 months in those meetings. I went on a vacation with that boyfriend. Vacation spot we had been to tons of times, except this time I wasn't drinking. And I'm thinking, I'm in this beautiful place, and all I can think of is how fat I look in my bathing suit, how much shit I have to do when I get back. What am I going to do when I can't have the Bahama Mama? What else can I drink? My mind was a minefield of ridicule. When I got back from that vacation, I raised my hand in a meeting and I started sobbing because I finally understood what I had been running from. And it was me. And it was a voice in my head that was constantly telling me I was never enough.
So you were running away from your own perfectionism, is that right?
Correct.
And so this wisdom that you've got, painfully acquired as it was, you've now transmitted into your speaking career and also into your book. What's the title of your book?
It's called Breaking the Circuit: How to Rewire Your Mind for Hope, Resilience, and Joy in the Face of Trauma.
It doesn't mention anything about addiction or the 12 steps in that title, does it?
You're absolutely right. It doesn't.
But your book deals with it. So what's going on there?
As I got my feet underneath me in sobriety and I hit true rock bottom in my marital crisis, this woman came into my life and said, "What if we did the steps on your marriage? You're not about to buy cocaine, but you're sure as hell powerless over what's going on there. And you're really trying to exert power over it, and it's making you crazy." And that sounded like a great idea to me. I was out of options. I had exhausted every childhood pattern of pleasing, perfecting, performing, controlling, managing, and manipulating into utter exhaustion and failure. I didn't want to die, but I didn't know how to live. So we go through the steps in this fresh way. And the pivotal turning point in my spiritual journey, which then I couldn't help but infuse where I could with my patients in the clinic as it was appropriate based on what was going on in their lives, was getting to the 9th step, which is making an amends. I had made so many amends. I was 5 years sober. Never to myself. And if what I was really suffering from was self-ridicule and self-disdain and self-loathing, and I was running from that, even physically abstinent, how had no one ever asked me that question in my whole life? 30 years old. professional self-lacerator. And this woman said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? That was the beginning of me being able to break through a limited belief that to forgive yourself is to let yourself off the hook, that your edge will go away. If you don't have that voice pushing you, then who are you? Who are you when you're not beating yourself up, Samantha? Well, I don't know yet who I am, but I know who I am when I am beating myself up. And I'm killing myself doing that. So I might as well try something else. So it was the very beginning of learning how to practice compassionate self-talk. So I'd have to notice the critical voice every time she showed up. I'd have to not feed her more stories to prove that she was correct. I'd have to go, if I'm somebody who's worthy of forgiveness and a marriage I actually like, what would I say to myself? Because I wouldn't keep saying to myself, this is what you get for what you did. You get this shitty marriage because you cheated on him before you got married. The punishment fits the crime. If I don't deserve that, what would I say instead? And I went through all the 12 steps in this way, in this fresh way, in a way that matched the crisis I was actually navigating. And suddenly I could hear my intuitive voice, which suggested that I should start a business, by the way. So my business was born out of my marital crisis and my spiritual rock bottom. Everything I kept learning again and again, as I then found out my husband had a 5-year extramarital affair. And in fact, I was right that something strange was going on. And then we decided to reconcile after I was sure I was going to divorce him. And then we had miscarriages and postpartum depression and all this stuff I was traversing in recovery and using the steps in a modern way to get through. My patients would come in. Why didn't you do your program? Well, because the house was supposed to be a certain way and my husband didn't do the things I wanted him to do. So I took over everything and I was exhausted. Oh, sounds familiar. Sounds like they might be stuck in a chronic cycle of overdoing and people pleasing and self-abandonment. How can I meet them where they're at and maybe facilitate a spiritual breakthrough such that they can then go do this program I designed for them that they paid me a lot of money for? It became really important to me that I didn't waste my pain and only share it in the rooms of recovery. You're right. I don't have addiction on the title of my book. The whole point of my book is that the 12 steps made modern, I believe that's really important. I mean, we are in 2024. I understand the sacred nature of ancient traditions like yoga. But if you go to yoga and you sit in chair pose and they tell you to squeeze your knees together, that is not biomechanically good for your knees. And when we know better, we should do better. So how do we take these ancient principles and practices and freshen them up with the science we now know? I want my book to be a spiritual template, not just for the addict who hates the 12 steps, but for the ordinary person who is inevitably going to suffer from fear, uncertainty, resentment, and loss. And perfectionism collapses with matters of the heart. Perfectionism works until it doesn't. And then what? What are you going to do?
So I agree that the 12 steps have a wisdom that needs to be shared with everyone. And I also agree that it's a blueprint for personal growth. I'm just so pleased to hear that, you've actually espoused that view and you've demonstrated how it can be used to achieve personal growth in the context of the demons that you've experienced. So where can we get this book? Where's it on? Where is the book available, online or on sale?
Amazon. You can also go to my website, but if you go onto Amazon and just type in Breaking the Circuit, Dr. Samantha Harte, it'll pop up. There's also the audible version, and I am the one who is reading the book because I had to. It's so personal. It's all the hardest stories of my life and how I got through them. And at the end of every chapter, a fresh take on each step. So there are 12 chapters to correspond to the 12 steps. So if somebody really wants to do the work, it is completely available to them in that book. But you could also go to my website, which is drsamanthaharte.com, and check out all the things I'm up to, including purchasing my book if you wanted.
Well, Samantha, thanks very much for your wisdom today. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that those who are watching and listening will be able to avail themselves of your wisdom. Many thanks.
Thank you so much.
That's all for today, folks. My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.